Good? Thank you. All right, guys, so this is Casablanca, right? It's 1942, directed by Michael Curtis. It's set during World War II. So one of the first things that I want you to think about is all the refugees trying to leave Europe during the Blitzkrieg, during Hitler's takeover. Most historians say the war started September 1st, 1939. By the spring of 1940, Hitler had control of almost all of Europe. And so if you were smart, you tried to get out of there. And so people are fleeing to Casablanca to try to get to the Americas. One of the big questions throughout the movie is who's in charge, right? Because at this time, Casablanca is still in Morocco. Morocco was a colony of France. Like I just said, Hitler took over France by June of 1940, but that's what's called occupied France. Casablanca is unoccupied France. So is the French government in control? Which French government? Are the Nazis in control? You're going to see this power struggle, right? One of the people who thinks he's in charge is the police chief, Louis Reynaud. Makes sense. You're in charge of the police of a city. You might be in charge. The Nazis certainly think they're in charge because they're taking over everything and they're in control of occupied France. One of the vocabulary terms I think you should know is Vichy France. Vichy is a city in France. If you remember when the French, pretty much caved and let Hitler just march on into Paris, the French government moved to this small town called Vichy, and so there's another informal government called Vichy France. Boys and girls, that's a puppet government of the Nazis. In fact, at one point you're going to hear Louis Reynaud, the police chief, say, Germany, Vichy. They're kind of synonymous. So is Vichy France in charge? You're going to see one Italian. If you remember, Italy was one of the Axis powers with Germany. He's kind of a joke. If you're a historian, this movie's hilarious. There's a lot of little jokes in there. So pay attention to the Italian. They really make fun of him because Mussolini and the Italians were kind of like the ugly little brother of Hitler. One name also that I really think you should know is Charles de Gaulle. If you've ever flown into Paris's airport, it's the Charles de Gaulle International Airport. Charles de Gaulle is going to be the leader of France after World War II, and he's the leader of the Free French Resistance. So even though I make fun of French people going to Vichy and caving to Hitler, a lot of French kind of were terrorists and launched this guerrilla fight against the Nazis without giving in. Charles de Gaulle was the leader of this French resistance. And so, like I said, it's a movie about refugees trying to get out of Casablanca, and what they need is an exit visa. They need a letter of transit. If you have a letter of transit signed by General de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle, it's kind of like your golden ticket. Can't be questioned, can't be rescinded, and so he's a really important guy in this movie. I think another really important thing to know about Casablanca is how isolationistic the United States was at the beginning of World War II. And if you were in my AP US history class, I do a little back and forth as to why the United States was so isolationistic. It goes all the way back to George Washington's farewell address. When Washington said goodbye, we got to teach him how to say goodbye. He said, hey, avoid entangling alliances. Europe is just war after war after war. Luckily, we have the Atlantic Ocean between us and those warmongers in Europe. Let's just stay out of these alliances. He was smart. Our population doubled every 24 years throughout the 1800s. We finally grew up to be big enough to take on some of these other powers. Now, granted, we did get involved in like the War of 1812, Mexican-American War, Spanish-American War, but we were pretty much out of world affairs until World War I. And so if you remember from US history or modern world, World War I, in part the United States got in based on Woodrow Wilson's idealism. Woodrow Wilson was the president. He promised World War I would be a war to end all wars. Boys and girls, have we had wars since then? Yes, we're going to see one in Casablanca. He said it's going to make the world safe for democracy. I'm still waiting, President Wilson, right? And so these promises that got the United States into World War I, that pulled us out of our isolationistic slumber, were totally broken. In fact, the United States Senate never even ratified the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I. So after World War I, we're just like, oh my God, the one time our country got into a foreign war, we got screwed, we got nothing out of it. Boom, we retreated way, way back into isolationism. So think about this. When did World War II begin? Most historians say September 1st, 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland. Sorry, I'm going to give a nod to, I spent 20 years teaching at Lowell, to Asians. I would say that World War II began like 1931, 1932, when Japan started attacking Manchuria, right? So you have these Japanese atrocities in Asia, in addition to Hitler and Mussolini, and the United States is like, no, we don't want to do anything. We got screwed in the last war. We didn't get into the war until we were attacked, right? The day after Pearl Harbor, December 8th, 1941, 10 years after it started in Asia, over 2 years after it had started in Europe, finally the United States got into the war. So isolationism is a huge part of this movie. And I think Rick, the main character played by Humphrey Bogart, represents the United States of America. Rick is isolationistic. One of the key things I want you to think about throughout watching this movie is that it was made in 1942. Guys, this is a year and a half, 2 years before D-Day. The outcome of the war was far from certain. 1942, like Hitler was having some trouble in Russia. Japan hadn't won a battle in 6 months or so, but we were nowhere close to winning. And so just, get a little patriotic, especially toward the end of this movie. And so the movie Casablanca is set 3 days in Casablanca. So you're going to see 3 different days. And it's pre-Pearl Harbor. At one point, Rick says to Sam, the famous piano player, Sam, it's December 1941 in Casablanca. What time is it in New York? So because the United States isn't in the war yet, it's December 1st through the 6th, 3 days in that time period. Back to Rick's isolationism. Rick says, I bet they're asleep in New York. I bet they're asleep all over America. Yeah, we were asleep. Horrible things were happening around the world, and we didn't want to get involved yet until we get attacked. Most of the action happens in Rick's club. It's called Rick's Café Américain. In fact, the original movie was based on a play called Everybody Comes to Rick's. Now there's a line in the movie, you're going to see it today, everybody goes to Rick's, or everybody comes to Rick's. So that's the working title of the play until they finally decided to call the movie Casablanca. Let's see. Now, even though Rick is an isolationist, you're going to find out that he has a past getting involved. So a couple things you should know about the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War to me is like the dress rehearsal for World War II. It happened in Spain between a fascist dictator named Franco, who wound up winning and controlled Spain until the 1970s, versus the loyalists who were loyal to the King of Spain, the loyalists or the royalists. So Rick, a couple times during the movie says, I stick my neck out for nobody. Sorry, I can't do a very good Humphrey Bogart impersonation, but I don't want to help anyone. I don't stick my neck out to help other people. And at one point he says that the police chief says, a wise foreign policy, right? To stay out of other people's business. One time the police chief says, Rick says to the police chief, sorry, Louis, whatever gave you the idea that I'd be interested in helping Laszlo escape? And the police chief says, look, you're a rank sentimentalist, meaning that he ran guns to, it's not up there, Ethiopia. Mussolini, remember the fascist dictator of Italy, was attacking in Africa, and he took over this portion of Ethiopia called Abyssinia, if that sounds familiar to you. Rick ran guns to Ethiopia, meaning he was fighting against the fascists. They're going to talk about Rick being on the side of the loyalists in the Spanish Civil War. So he's fighting against the fascists. So he was kind of like the United States in World War I. He did these things, and he kind of got screwed, so he's like, I'm out of it. Later on, Ilsa, played by Ingrid Bergman, smoking hot, she's going to say, Richard, if they found out your record, it wouldn't be safe for you. So you got to get out of Paris before, as the Nazis are closing in on Paris. Rick has to escape, otherwise the Nazis might get mad for his previous actions against fascism. Boys and girls, I just think this is such a classic movie. Ms. Baget wrote up here, 6 of the most famous quotes are from this movie on the AFI's list. It's generally ranked in the top 5 movies ever. But you're going to see cultural references to Casablanca for the rest of your life. Other movies make reference to Casablanca in some of its famous scenes. Famous director Woody Allen even has a movie called Play It Again, Sam, which is one of the most misquoted lines in the movie. Rick says, play it. Ilsa says, play it, Sam. No one ever says, play it again, Sam. But you'll hear that. It's incorrect. TV shows. This is a little embarrassing. For 10 years, I watched Beverly Hills 90210. Never missed an episode. They talked about Casablanca. They even did a whole episode that was kind of Casablanca-based. TV commercials, ice skating. I used to be into ice skating. Now I think it's kind of a fraud. It's too subjective. Judges cheat. But there was a Canadian ice skater named Kurt Browning who came out in this white tuxedo with a little black tie, and he was pretending to smoke a cigarette. And the music of Casablanca came in. He did his whole routine as if he was Rick in Casablanca. Like gold medal. Awesome. Some of the most famous lines in movie history are from this movie. Here's looking at you, kid. No? Anyone? Rick says it 4 times. Well, we'll always have Paris. Oh, I got goosebumps. It's so romantic. Of all the gin joints and all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine. None of this sounds familiar? Parting is such sweet sorrow. Oh, that's Shakespeare. Sorry. Okay. How about round up the usual suspects? There was even a movie called The Usual Suspects, taken from Casablanca. Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. You're going to hear this, your kids. You're going to hear these the rest of your lives. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of your lives. The problems of 3 little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. So I just quoted Shakespeare, guys. Casablanca to me is like Shakespeare. People quote these lines, and there's references all over the place. So like I said, most of the action happens in Rick's Cafe American. It is a Hollywood set. It is not a real nightclub. So just pay attention to the detail, the intricacy, how they tried to make it look Middle Eastern, someplace in the Kasbah, Morocco, Casablanca. Sorry, teenagers, millennials, it's in black and white. Now, I'm not sorry at all. This is 1942. They certainly could have used color. Gone with the Wind, 1939, color. Wizard of Oz, mostly color, 1939. This is an artistic choice to kind of harken back to olden days, and the cinematography is just gorgeous. Pay attention to the lighting, the reflections, the shadows. Even Ilsa's jewelry, when they do a close-up on Ingrid Bergman, like sometimes like her necklace will just sparkle, her earrings will sparkle, and it was all very, very well calculated. In terms of awards, it won Best Picture, it won Best Director, it won Best Adapted Screenplay. Humphrey Bogart got nominated for Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor was a nomination. Cinematography, I can't believe it lost to Phantom of the Opera. It got nominated for editing, which is a joke. The editing is actually, I worship this movie. The editing's bad. Sorry. The music, your last term, boys and girls, bow down, Max Steiner. The way the music sets a tone to make you feel like you're 1941 Casablanca. Progression of the story, sometimes when you need a little downtime. Max Steiner, hello. Also did music for Gone with the Wind. Anyone? No? What are you, an ISIS? The music for King Kong. The music for a movie called, you may have heard of it, A Star is Born. No, not Gaga. The original, A Star is Born, Max Steiner, A Summer Place. Sorry, Miss Baget, she probably doesn't want me to talk about this. It's kind of hard for teenagers to pick up on until it becomes obvious. There's a little prostitution ring going on in the movie. People are desperate to get out of Europe, desperate to get out of Casablanca, and the police chief is kind of a horn dog. And the police chief is giving away these exit visas to women who will prostitute themselves. And so you'll see at one point, someone says, there's another visa problem, and the police chief goes and checks himself in the mirror and says, show her in. It's kind of creepy. So I'm going to point out twice today that couple. Because unless you've seen the movie 70, 80 times like I have, the first time you see it, you're not going to notice it's the same couple throughout the whole movie. But this woman ultimately tries to get an exit visa by, doing the nasty with the police chief. What else? Boys and girls, I used to show this for my AP US history final. I did not want any of my kids going off to college without understanding Casablanca, how important it is. Ishibashi came along, shortened the length of the final, so I couldn't quite fit all of Casablanca in the block. Kids that have had me before will tell you, I made them show up early. No, you have to show up 20 minutes early for the final so you can watch all of Casablanca. They're like, wait, we have to come early for the... I'm like, I'm showing you a movie. You're welcome. So that's kind of the way I feel right now. You're welcome, boys and girls. You get to see one of the best movies ever made. Enjoy. Please take some notes. Cut.